Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. If you heard my message, my voicemail earlier this afternoon, then you heard my excitement for tonight's topic and for Dr. Nestor joining us. So thank you for being here. I also want to say thank you to our high school students who have offered to provide some babysitting services for us, as well as our fabulous team here in the Milford School District that helped us to organize and set up for this evening, and our community partners that you met as you were coming in today. So Milford Thrives, a Wadley Library, Harbor Care. We've got so many great partners that are working together with our schools, our teachers, families, offering supports, because as we all know, doesn't matter if you're a classroom teacher or if you're a parent, we know we can't do this job alone. And so we've got some great partners out there in the Milford community, and we are so grateful. It is my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Dr. Michael Nestor. Dr. Nestor is a pediatric clinical neuropsychologist, that's a mouthful, with over 40 years of experience, trained at Tufts Medical, and recently moved here to Milford. In February, Dr. Nestor sent me an email and asked, how can I help? Is there something I can do? I saw his title, I saw the enthusiasm in his email, and I couldn't call him fast enough. He's been a gift to our schools ever since. We're excited about his continued consultation services, trainings for staff, as well as for families, and his expertise as we learn together more about the challenging behaviors that we sometimes see in our young people. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Nestor this evening.
I think we're close enough here. Can you all hear me? I can yell louder if you want. I mean, I think that's good enough. Okay. That's my tribute to Chuck Berry. If any of you are enthusiasts of rock and roll history or saw Back to the Future, Johnny Be Good. I used to play in a band when I was in my Sal days, which is how I got to graduate school, but that's another story. I always like to present a case because it gives you a reference. It gives you a reference to what I'm talking about, and we'll revisit it later after I bent your ear about a lot of other things. So let's say we have little Johnny here, normal birth, normal delivery, much loved baby. You know, grandparents fell all over him, parents fell all over him. Gorgeous little boy. Very active toddler. You know, he needed a leash on him basically because he was busy. Very eager to please though, and just a darling little boy. However, age 3, birth of a sibling. Pretty little girl came along and there were attention issues. He wasn't getting enough. She was getting too much. And so you had a little bit of drama. Now, mom works, dad works. And they have different parenting styles. Mom's the hard nose. Dad is like, I'm home from work, come on. Age 4. Suddenly, opposition behavior. Favorite word is no. Frustrates easily. Aggressive. Aggressive toward mom. Aggressive toward his sister. A little bit towards dad, but not that much. Dad's his go-to guy. Come 5. Poor frustration tolerance. Frustrates very quickly. Way too quickly for his age. Very poor cooperation with adult agendas. Come on, Johnny. We got to go. We're going to grandma's. Come on, Johnny. Come on, Johnny. All right, go on. Come 6. Starts school. Doesn't fit in well in the classroom. Doesn't want to cooperate with the teacher. Doesn't want to do what the other kids are doing. Aggressive behavior. Temper tantrums. At least 2 or 3 a week. Really bouncing off the walls. Teachers are very unhappy, trying to do everything they can to have him fit in with the classroom. not working, and he doesn't improve with time, doesn't grow out of it. Each week is worse than the next. Okay, that's little John. Now, what's it all about? What's all this behavior about? Well, we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about brain development because I'm a neuropsychologist and because that's where all the behavior originates. Unless you understand where it's coming from, it's very difficult to get a handle on why it's there and what you need to be doing and not spinning your wheels. We're going to talk about ages and stages, development a little bit. What happens with each developmental age, and what has that got to do with behavior? And we're going to talk about some syndromes of behavior, ADHD, autistic spectrum disorder. And we're going to talk a lot about things that help. So, how did we get from this to this? If you know somebody like this, it's not surprising. I'm going to talk about brain development. Now, I know it's complicated for those of you who don't have a background. Even for those who do, you may not have a specific background here. But the point I'm trying to get across is when that little baby is born, they have 86 billion neurons. We used to think there was 100 billion, but we've scaled it down a little bit with our research over the years. There's 2,500 synapses. These are synapses, the connections between cells. Another cell here, here. The brain is half the weight of an adult. Now, at age 3, look at what happens. 2,500 goes to 15,000. How did that happen? These things grow. Dendrites grow. They're the connections between cells, and they have to grow because the whole point of this little bitty thing, think about it. Baby's born, they can't do anything but basically eat, sleep, cry, go to the bathroom. That's it. On 1 year, they're talking, they understand you, they have preferences. How did it get there? Well, it wasn't magic. Dendrites, the connections form, and they form by their experiences. Now, at age 6, the brain is almost as big as it's ever going to get. It's never going to have any more cells, but these dendrites, these connections form, and they're what helps the child grow and understand. And so, as an adult, they go from age 3, 15,000 to 7,500, gets cut in half. The connections get cut in half. Why? Because they're not necessary. The whole thing about brains is just like a computer. The more power it has, the more lean it gets, the faster it gets, the better it is at doing what it's supposed to do. And don't let anybody ever tell you that we only use 15% of our brains. We use it all, and we use it all the time. But in the beginning, in the first 6 years, the brain is developing like a juggernaut. It's like going downhill as fast as it can. Children have a much higher heart rate. They have a much higher metabolism. And the reason is they're not only growing physically, but this is changing. The brain is changing. And all that development that does in the first 6 years is necessary to get it to the point where it's ready to go to school. So, ages and stages. Okay, toddlers, all about learning. They're sponges. They want to know everything. They stick their fingers in everything, sockets, other things. They taste everything. They put everything in their mouth, in their ears. They want to know. So it's all about learning. That brain is developing as it is because it's learning. That's what changes those connections. Preschoolers, family rules, personality, the beginning of socialization. By 5 years old, the personality in the child is fairly well formed. You're not going to change it a whole lot. The kid that's kind of independent, he's going to be as an adult. So it's pretty much set by this point. The brain is changing, and the way it's changing is to develop the social skills that are necessary to have it fit in with society as an adult. It's the beginning. It gets refined, but this is the big part of preschoolers. So the family roles get sorted out. Remember Johnny? He was so unhappy when his sister came along. That's because his role was only child. Suddenly, he's big brother, which isn't near as good. So, school age. The socialization continues, it gets ramped up. Learning styles become important. How the child learns. Are they passive? Are they active? Are they talkers? Are they listeners? Are they leaders? What are they? This gets sorted out. And they learn environmental adjustment, the difference between home and school. You can do this at school, you can't do it at home. You can do this at home, but you can't do it at school. There's things you can do on the bus, there's things you can't do on the bus. And each environment becomes specific, and the children learn how to adjust. Even if you do absolutely nothing, they learn how to adjust. They absorb the rules. Most. Pre-adolescent, a big social adjustment. Suddenly, the world is bigger. It's not just the family, it's all outside, and particularly computers, social media, all those good things. Peer processing, they learn how to get along better. They choose friends. Their friends vary, but their friends are important to them now, much more important than they were before. And you see the beginnings of clique building. Girls do this before boys. But suddenly, the girl who at 9 years old was very happy at home and, you know, go with the family and this and that, suddenly, I can't go there. I'm hanging out with the girls. Well, you're going. I'm not going to be happy. See, this is where it becomes important and it gets refined because you get to adolescence and suddenly adolescents are in practice to be adults. Now, when you're practicing something, you start off not being very good at it, and they're not. And this is what makes us all crazy. Because they are defining adult roles. What am I supposed to do as an adult? Well, I get to drive the car. You're 15, you're not going to drive the car. You learn. Nope, you learn when you're 60. I should be able to learn now. And the argument starts. They build long-term relationships. Some of the relationships that kids develop in school last a lifetime. I had a best friend in school, and my God, it's been 60 years, and we're still pretty close. I mean, we still talk at least a couple times a month. So this is important, but they're not good at it yet. Well, look at us all here. So these are common behavior issues that are definable. And by that, I mean, you put them in a category. And it's important to put them in categories. There's normal transient behavior problems. These things are normal processing. The terrible twos are a good example. Children at 2 suddenly learn the word no, it becomes their favorite word, and stomping around the house and throwing things becomes their secondary go-to. That is transient because it's self-limiting. The child develops, their brain develops out of that, and they move on to another stage where they're no longer saying no, but okay, Mom. And that day you go, hallelujah. But it's transient. Some kids, it's not transient. There's something called conduct disorder. Conduct disorder children, typically that diagnosis can't be made before age 10. And it usually applies to children who are very distinct problems and serious problems. These children lie, steal, are aggressive, devious, bullying, blame others, and they do really serious harmful things to other children, adults, animals. anything they feel they can get away with. These are all defined under DSM-5. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, which is what psychiatrists use to talk to each other. It's a consensus document. Basically, what it means is we've all agreed that this is what conduct disorder is. We're going to define it so that when I say conduct disorder, y'all know what I mean. And when you bill for it, you can get paid. There's oppositional defiant disorder. Oppositional defiant disorder is a little bit different in that it starts earlier. These are children who basically, their whole thing is they don't want to follow anything or anybody that they don't feel is something they really want to do. And they can be aggressive. They can be destructive. They can be difficult to the point where they won't cooperate with any adult or authority figure. They want to go and hang out at the mall. They don't want to come to school. They want to go with their friends. They want to smoke a little weed. And if anybody bothers them, their hackles go right up and they're ready to go. This is oppositional defiant disorder. It's usually made about sometime after 6 years of age. And it can persist well into late adolescence when it gets called something else. Now, there can be behavior problems as part of another disorder. ADHD, for example. You have some of these issues that can also be attributed to part of ADHD, or part of depression, or part of childhood agitation or adjustment disorder. And then there's something called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, DMDD. That's fairly recent. And what it means basically is these children can't regulate. They can't settle. They're always on edge. They're always frustrated. They're always stomping around. They're angry all the time. They're miserable all the time. They throw temper tantrums at least 3 or 4 times a week, at least. And there's some linkage to bipolar disorder. In fact, this was added to DSM. Oops, how did I get here? Shows you I'm not very good with this. I'll get back. But what this shows is this used to be a part of bipolar disorder, and there was a lot of difficulty separating these kids out from kids who were truly bipolar with the hypermanic and hypomanic states. This is a little bit different in that they're dysregulated. They just can't settle. Unfortunately, most of these kids, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and disruptive mood disorder, are bad enough to get under the care of a psychiatrist or a team, preferably a team, and dealing with it includes one-on-one group therapy, family therapy, medications, etc. I mention these because this is a reference. These are the severe behavioral issues that we come up against. Now, let's talk about syndromes and behavior. ADHD. ADHD depends on what research you look at, but it's 5 to 7% of the population usually. Some people say it goes up to 10, other people say it's closer to 4, but basically 5 to 7 in the general population. 3 to 1 boys to girls, more common in boys. And it's genetically based for the most part. But you can also see it in children who are survivors of traumatic brain injury, children who are survivors of meningitis or other neuro diseases. It can also occur in children who have been traumatized. You can see ADHD symptoms in PTSD, but we don't call it that. It's a lifelong condition. Most of it is genetic. And it impacts behavior, learning, socialization, all of that. Now, when you look at ADHD, though, there's a couple major subtypes. There's the inattentive distractible. These kids are not behavior problems for the most part. They sit quietly. Teachers love them. Sit in the back of the room, never bother anybody. Just kind of zoning out. But they're learning something. Think about it. You're all sitting here just zoning out. My words are going, and you're just sitting here going, "Ooh, boy, when I get home, man, that beer is waiting for me." And you're thinking, what's the time about anyway? See, this is what I mean. That kid does that every single day. So how much is getting in? And especially in the early years, this can be a distinct problem. The teachers, they don't notice anything wrong until they start doing the evals. And then suddenly, he's not keeping up. Now, hyperactive, impulsive, oh, they're in the classroom. They're in the classroom the first day, and every day thereafter, they are exactly that. They're hyperactive. They don't sit still. They may sit still briefly, they're out. Then they'll fidget. Even when they're in the seat, they're under the seat, over the seat, on top of the desk, under the desk, playing with this, playing with that, playing with the next thing. And impulsive. There is no filter. Whatever comes in their head goes out their mouth. Teacher, 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 teacher. I know that one. But we're not doing that one right now. We're doing this one. Oh, that's okay. I know that one. See? And this is not just once or twice a day. This is all day, every day. That's the hyperactive impulsive type. Now, a lot of these kids are difficult to manage behaviorally because of that. They can also have temper tantrums. They can also be assertive, not necessarily aggressive, but at least assertive. You want to get their 2 cents in, always. So the problem is that when you're dealing with this type, the learning becomes a major issue. How you're going to deal with that. When you're dealing with this type, oftentimes they learn at normal rates. You test them, they know it. How does he know it? He's not paying any attention. He's standing up, waving his hand, and doing this and jumping around and everything else. No, somewhere it's coming through. Osmosis, I don't know, but it's coming through. These kids, So 2 very different problems. Now, what's happening here? Well, all the heavy lifting is done in the frontal lobes. This area up, oops, can't touch that screen. This area up in here, this blue area here is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the front of your brain. This is where the heavy lifting is going on. This is what tells you, pay attention, don't pay attention. It's not really important. Yeah, that is important. It gives you a hierarchy of things you pay attention to or don't pay attention to. It tells you to stop or go. Boy, she's really mad tonight. I better sit down to dinner rather than going out and doing some stuff in the yard. That kind of judgment, that kind of differentiation is all done up in here. Now, the limbic system is this green area in here. Why are these things important? Well, because the limbic system is where the emotions are. It's where the behavior really comes into play. And you notice it sits right next to the prefrontal cortex. So there's a nice fast connection in between the two. So if you get really ticked off by the teacher here, guess what happens? The frontal lobes say, I don't like that. I don't like that. I need to do something. What am I going to do? Well, if I go and grab the pigtail of the girl next to me, that should do it. See, this is what happens. The behavior and the emotional connections. The behavior is essentially mitigated right up in here. That's where you decide what the behavior is going to do. But so what? Well, with ADHDs, there's something called executive function. Executive function has to do with what happens in that frontal lobe. All the decision-making process that goes on in there. It gets connections from everywhere else, but it happens up in here. ADHDs do not mature at the same rate as normal stuff in the frontal cortex. This is executive function. Planning, self-monitoring, working memory. If I say to you right now, remember these 3 words, and I go tax, bottom, green. Tax, bottom, green. Okay, that tax, bottom, green that you're running through your head at that time is working memory. It's about 15 seconds to 30 seconds worth. That's all it is. What that does is it allows you to stick it somewhere else so that you retain it. Because if I said the next words, I'm going to give $100. Anybody who can get those 3 words right. Oh boy, it's going right into another section of the brain, which is the interior lateral temporal lobes, where the hippocampus sits there and says, tell me everything you really need to know, and I'll remember it. But the working memory is here. The organization, impulse control, emotional control. Sound familiar? Everything I'm talking about that these people have hard times with, it's executive function. When it comes to ADHDs, these children do not mature at the same rates. And why is that important? Because if you look at this, here's the ADHD group. This green one is the typically developing group. Look what happens. They lag. They lag about 2 to 3 years, and it's even more pronounced in the frontal lobe. All cortical points, it lags about 2 years. And what does that mean? It means that when your ADHD child goes to school at, let's say, 6, they're still functioning back around 4 in terms of that ability to manage themselves, to make good judgments, to fit in with the classroom and everything else. And see, it lags for a long time. And what it means is age in years. Look at this. It doesn't really catch up till they're 20. So that means that the kids that you're talking to at 15 and you expect to understand, they're not functioning at 15, maybe 13, maybe 12, in terms of their ability to make judgments at that level. But your expectations are there because you say, hey, they're 15, they should know. How can you be so stupid as to go and hang out with those people when you know they're going to get in trouble? Well, to 12-year-olds, that makes perfect sense. See? So this is a big deal. What it means is you must adjust your expectations and you must adjust your techniques of how you deal with them based on this diagnosis. So if you have an ADHD child, it's no easy go. If you're trying to say, well, he's 16, you should know. You should know. Or when they're 18. They go off to college at 18, and they may be bright enough. They may not be ready socially or emotionally to handle it. That's why you get a phone call about November saying, we have a little problem with your son or daughter. And this is where it goes. So this is an issue. ADHD issues. Talk about ADHD. Okay, for one thing, they live in the moment. You say to him, you don't get your homework done, you're not going out this weekend. Now, this is Tuesday, weekends, Saturday, Friday night. Anything can happen over 4 days. Come on. They're going to listen to you right then? If you say to them, you don't get your homework done, your Wi-Fi goes off, the computer goes off, I take your phone now. And oh, by the way, supper waits till you get it done. Guess which one is going to win? They live in the moment. Boredom is one of their, they worry about boredom. My God, we're going to dinner at Grandma's. What can I do? I got to get myself load some games on it. I got to do this, you know. And you're saying, hey, put that away. Yeah. See, it's not registered. Boredom wins. They're really concerned about this. Surprising, but you know, you have 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds who are worried that they don't have anything to play with when they're going to be sitting for half an hour. And a half an hour is a long time. Delayed gratification is an oxymoron. There is no such animal. I want everything now. I'll give you $1 if you pick up all the trash outside and everything. Give me the $1, then I'll go pick it up. It's the idea that they can't wait. They can't. And like I said, there's no filter. Whatever comes into their head goes out their mouth. Boy, some of the things that come out their mouth. Ooh. Executive function issues predominate. There is some suggestion that the next iteration of the DSM-5, the DSM-6, when it comes out, is no longer going to have ADHD. It's going to have executive function deficit disorder. And it's going to be defined differently. It's going to be defined by what problems they have with executive function. Do they have problems with start-stop? They have problems with working memory. They have problems with dealing with impulse, etc. They're usually immature, social, emotional learning, and everything varies in degree. You have ADHDs who are great students, very bright people, and they get through school okay. Yeah, they have their ups and downs behaviorally, but they manage. You have others who can't make the adjustment very easily at all. And these are ones who are constant problems. And I got news. When they get to school, initially, you have an adjustment issues with learning how to work with ADHD. And finally, after 2 years, you figure they've settled in, they're now 8 years old, and they actually do pretty good. And you think, I got it late. Then come about 12. You have a revisitation. Why? Because these kids go through adjustments in terms of how they gain skills. And the problem is they go through a big adjustment between 12 and 14 years in terms of social skill development, in terms of ADHD stuff. So what worked before, again, may no longer work, and you must make different adjustments. The kids that did fairly well in 5th, 6th, 7th grade suddenly begin struggling 8th and 9th. And you're saying, what happened? What happened? They just moved on to another level in terms of their development. So let's switch gears a little bit. Autistic spectrum disorder. Autistic spectrum disorder is a different animal. These individuals, and the prevalence is about 1 in 54. Used to be a lot lower. I mean, when I was training, I mean, we used to say that autistic children were about 6 per 10,000. It's changed. It's changed because of a number of things. It's changed because we've changed the criteria for diagnosing autistic spectrum disorder. It used to be just autism, and it was definable a little bit differently. Now we've added a few things and changed a few things. So ASDs now encompass a much broader spectrum. Boys to girls, still about 2.5 to 1. And other disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders are common. Intellectual disabilities, epilepsy, other difficulties. They have basically impairments in behavior, communication, social skill development. These are the hallmarks. And you have children who have early onset and late onset. The early onset are what we used to call planner's autism, which is basically they're born with it. You notice right away that they don't make eye contact. They don't develop language. They have social issues, repetitive behaviors, etc. Then there's another type which they look normal early on. There's very few symptoms, if any, that are definable. And then about 2 years old, they start losing skills. And then they start deteriorating in terms of their social function and their language function, and many times their cognitive function as well. Best evidence is for genetic basis. There's no evidence to show anywhere so far that you can cause autism environmentally, that you can cause it in terms of bad parenting or bad environment or even heavy metals. There's just no evidence to support that. There may be some that do, but we don't have any evidence to show that. I've been involved in a good bit of research in terms of this. And basically, there's just no evidence that is solid that supports this. And it's unfortunate, but we really don't have it anymore. We know there are some types of autism which we have tagged as having definite genetic linkages, and there are things like the Hoxa gene, for example, that I was involved in the early research on, which has been shown to be linked to autism. But there's very few that would define that way. So it's still a very difficult area, but I'm digressing a little bit. With ASD issues, behaviorally, social communication, sensory concerns. They see things, feel things, and respond to things differently than other children. They have sensory awareness of things. For example, I'm working with a boy who was quite bright, had good communication skills, and would spend the better part of half a day sitting in front of the blinds because the way the pattern of light came in at different times of the day and reflected off the kind of wallpaper that he had, he was just fascinated. And he would sit there for half a day. And then he'd go and do his homework. Communication. The best evidence we have is that if an autistic child develops communication skills, reasonable communication skills, by that I mean interactive communication, by the time they're 5 or 6, the outcomes are better. If they don't, the outcomes are worse. It's that simple. Because if they don't have the ability to have true interactive communication, it's a very difficult life. The transitions are difficult. You may have a child who is well adapted to the home, has some of his moments, things go wrong, etc. But when he gets on that bus to go to school, that transition is hard, and it has to be trained, and it takes time. And when you change schools, good luck, because then it all has to be done over again. It's not easy, and the older they get, sometimes the harder it is. They depend on routine. If things change, if dinner comes at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock, some of the kids, if the roast beef is on the right side of the plate instead of on the left side of the plate, they're not going to eat it. Routine is not just useful, it's important to them because it gives them the structure. If you think about it, these kids go through all day in a different world than we do. They respond to stimuli differently. They hear things differently. They feel things differently. They see things differently. And so everything is different to them. And when you start changing things around, when you say, gee, we've had the same wallpaper for 6 or 7 years now, I think Johnny would like a different kind of wallpaper. You change the wallpaper and suddenly Johnny, who's been fairly well adjusted, goes off into the tulies, won't come in the door, screams and yells, throws himself all around, won't go to school, bites everybody that comes near him and everything else. What did you do? You changed the wallpaper. Do not change the wallpaper. He doesn't care. He likes it that way. This is a concept. I'm telling you this because these are things that I've dealt with parents. And sometimes it's simple. I had one family that they couldn't figure out what they changed, couldn't figure out what went wrong. He had the AC fixed. AC hadn't been running for 2 years, central AC. He had it fixed. Vibration, noise. Repetitive behaviors. This. Flipping paper. It soothes them. The repetition soothes them. It's a sensory perceptual thing. And even people who are extremely bright, ASDs, and very capable, and functioning independently for all other reasons, they still like to flip their paper. They're easily overstressed. You can't put pressure on them and say, you know, we have to do this. We have to do this. If they really don't want to do it, you're wasting your time. And all you're going to do is wind them up. And all that's going to happen is you're going to be very unhappy. They are going to be unhappy. And God help the teacher when they walk into the classroom. The cognition varies. Somewhere about half are less than 75 IQ. And about a third are below 50. And there's a great deal of variance. So if you have a child who's ASD and they got fairly good communication skills and they can function independently for the most part, that's good. And you work with that. But if they can't learn to read and write, that has to be okay. Because they may not have the ability in that particular area. They might be able to do other things like art, music, but they may not be able to do that. And if you insist on doing that, problems. Most behaviors improve with age, but the timing and the degree vary. Most of the kids, even the most severely impaired ones I've worked with, they do improve. It's how much they're going to improve, in what ways. If you don't have language and the child's 8 years old, I mean, no language, the issues are there and the language is not likely to improve a great deal. Getting language late is hard because what we suspect is a lot of this is hardwired. And if you look at brain development, by the time you get to be 9 or 10 years old, all those nice connections that are made with the temporal lobes where language functions have to be there. So, what works? Consistency. For all these kids, even the ones who are not impaired, even the ones who are, quote, normal and have maybe transient behavior problems, the more consistent you can do it, the better. Can't say enough about that. Children are dependent. They can't go out and earn their own living. They can't buy a house. They can't buy a car, drive a car, buy their own food. They can't do any of this stuff. And the younger they are, the least they can do. So that their stability and security are dependent. The more consistent you are, the happier they are. Why is that? Well, it's simple. If they can predict what's going to happen, they do better. Their environment is really you. Now, consistency, though, means that it can't always be the same, but you have to be predictable. If you're a bear when you come home, actually kids can deal with that. You come home from work and you're like, I hate my job. I'm going to kill somebody if I don't have a beer right now. I'm going to have that beer. Don't get in my way. Hi, Johnny. You know, they recognize that. They can deal with that. Trust me. They can work with that. But if you come home that day, that way one day, and you don't come home that way for 2 more, then you come home that way another day, and you don't come home another day, and then suddenly 4 or 5 days, it's like they don't know what to expect. So they hang back and they wait to see. And you're wondering, come on, I'm dad. Yeah, but you're not dad every day. So what works consistently? Collaboration between environments, school, home, sports, outside activities. The idea is you have to make it work. If you come home, you're working, your husband's working, you get home, and the kid's got soccer practice, and the other one has ballet, and this one over here wants to go to his friend's house, and that kind of stuff. You got 2 cars, and you're thinking, how the hell am I going to do this? You have to work it out. Talk to the teacher, talk to the things, work out carpooling, do whatever you have to do. But you have to make it work across environments. Remember I said environment specific. They know how to behave in different environments. But if you flood them, if it's like a mess every single time, you're driving the car and you're gritting your teeth, they know that you're not happy. They know you really don't want to take them to soccer practice. And it bothers them. They love you. So you got to work it out. And the more you can work these out, the easier it's going to be. Now, with kids with behavior problems, you have to have a plan. But the magic words here are with consensus. What does that mean? It means that if you're sitting in the meeting and the team leader presents the plan and the teacher's sitting there going, I don't like this. And dad's sitting there going, and mom's sitting there, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Guess what's going to happen? Nothing. Nothing will change because you're all on different pages and you're not working together. You got to work together. All of this has to get together. You know, you have to have consensus. You have to have everybody believing in what you're doing. You have to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your child. What do they do well? Stop worrying about so much about, God almighty, he's got this behavior problem, that behavior problem. He's coming out of his ears and the teacher's yelling at me and I got my wife saying over here that, you know, he's not getting his homework done. And she's complaining and grandma's calling and saying, well, you know, I've heard he's having a little bit of a problem. And, what does he do well? What's he good at? Is he a good football player? Is he a good basketball player? Is he good at video games? Is he good at something? What is he good at? And build that in. And every time you bitch about his weaknesses, make sure that you compliment him on his strengths. You don't give one without the other. It's like your boss coming and saying to you, oh, by the way, you got to work this weekend. We're going away. Sorry, you got to work this weekend, but I'm going to pay you triple time. All right, I can do that. See, suddenly something became, something becomes, I can work with that. Okay, this is what you got to do. You got to give every time you complain. So, understanding the strengths and the weaknesses. You only fight the battles where everybody wins. Don't go to the wall on stuff that doesn't make any difference in the long run. You got to make it so that everybody wins. Okay, your wife and you are divorced and you got shared custody. And, you know, it's like everybody wants their pound of flesh. Well, you got to give up the pound of flesh because everybody's got to win out of this. The kid's got to win, you got to win, and she's got to win. How do you do that? You sit down and you work it out, and it ain't easy. Everything I'm telling you here is damn hard. You're going to be unhappy. But when you get to the end of the day, you're going to sit there and say, wasn't that bad? If it starts working out. So you fight the battles where everybody wins. Remember who's who. What are your roles and responsibilities? Dad has his role. Mom has her role. Remember what I said about parenting styles? Okay, you got mom over here is the hard nose. And she's going, he's got to get that done. If he doesn't get that done, the sun will not come up tomorrow. And so they all have their roles. The child's role is he's the child. He's going to try and please you. Even the ones who are off the wall and behaving like you just want to pack them and ship them, you know, he really loves you. And I use he a lot because if you saw the ratios, more boys than girls. But the girls too. They love you. They want to make you happy. But they also don't want to be unhappy. And if it's a choice of making you unhappy and making them unhappy, they're going to choose to make you unhappy, at least temporarily. But the responsibilities and relationships, work it out, spend the time. There is nothing more important than your child. Nothing. I'm speaking as a father. And I'm speaking as a parent of an ADHD child who was an adventure growing up, who is now safely married, has a very good job, graduated cum laude, and is doing very well. But it was the first 20 years that were the hardest. You've got to take the long view. You cannot get trapped into saying, well, we're going to get this done today. We're going to get this done this week. He's going to get it done now. He's going to learn to read by next Wednesday. You got to take the long view. Remember what I said about the delay in ADHDs, where they don't mature as fast? You might have to sit there and suffer through another couple years with trying to get things done that you think should have been done by this age. You got to be okay with that. You work hard, you do things, it gets better. But if you take the short view and you're trapped in the short view, you're going to be unhappy, the child's going to be unhappy, and I guarantee the teachers are going to be unhappy. And all of us who work with them are going to be unhappy. Why? Because it's a dogfight every day. So, what doesn't work? Problematic parenting styles. Okay, talk about parenting styles. Basically, there's four. A lot of you have probably seen this little chart here. You have low limits and boundaries and high limits and boundaries. Then you have high love and warmth and low love and warmth. Okay. You have high limits and boundaries and high love and warmth. That's the authoritative. That's the one everybody wants to be. What is authoritative? It means that you have reasonable rules. You have negotiation to make sure that the child knows why the rules are there and what's going on and where it's all going. Then you have the authoritarian, my way or the highway. Nah, did that way when I was a kid, we're going to do it that way now. You don't like it, there's the door. Good luck. Now, the problem with that is you get kids who basically, they're unhappy. They want to please you, but they know they can't. They're going to do what you say, but they suffer for it. And it's brittle. It means when stressors come from the outside, and there will be stressors, it's called adolescence, if nothing else. When the stressors come from the outside, they can't deal with it very well. Then you have permissive. Permissive is, I want to be your friend. They don't want a friend, they want a parent. You go to be their friend, they're going to treat you like a friend. And that means when things go wrong, and they always go wrong, mom's my friend. She understands. She won't get too upset that I drove the car when I was 13 with 4 kids in it and put it around a tree over here. She'll be fine. And then you have the neglectful parent. We're really busy. Here's $5, go and get yourself something. And you know where that goes. You get kids who here just ramp up. They got to get your attention somehow. And they'll keep pushing the envelope until they do. And boy, when they push, you'll be surprised what they can do. What doesn't work? So problematic parenting styles. Rigidity. If you don't have any flex, I mean, come on. You go to class, and what happens? The teacher tells you, these are the rules, here's what we're going to cover today, etc. You kind of expect that. But where there's no flex at all, the kid comes up and says, I really can't do it to me. And they're normally able to do it, and they normally do it. You're going to say, you have to do it anyway? No, you got to have a little flex in it. I had an ADHD kid that I was taking care of. And God love her, she tried hard. But she was so distractible and everything else. But her parents were working with her. We had a teacher at school, and I know none of your teachers were like that. And he was pretty rigid. She had worked on this thing all weekend with her parents, this project. She gets to school, she hands it in. Teacher said, it's not stapled. I'm not going to accept it. Not stapled. We had to call the police actually because, the father had designs on going to school and straightening the situation out with a baseball bat, and that wasn't going to work well for anybody. But the rigidity there with this individual, and this is a true story. I mean, I was there. And, fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and we had a nice meeting with the team, and we had the teacher see another way forward. But the rigidity is what I'm trying to tell you about. You can't be locked in all the time. You can set rules, you can set limits, you have to set limits, and you have to have rules. But you also have to build in some flex, and you have to know when to flex. You can't fit the square peg into the round hole. Some of these kids are not going to adjust well, no matter what you do. They have too many difficulties, too many problems, and you have to make adjustments. You're really lucky here, because from what I've seen of the school so far, you have a lot of support for behavioral issues here. Most schools in a town this size, they just don't have that. And the idea is you sit down, you make a plan, you work it out, and you find the square hole that this child can fit into. Sometimes it's hard because sometimes you don't see it. As I say, you have an ADHD, for example, who's the inattentive type. They don't look that bad. They're not bouncing off the walls. They're not fidgety. They sit there. And you're saying, we don't need to do anything here. They'll get it. They'll get it. No, they won't. Without doing something specific to help them get it, they're that square peg. Now, you have to see, again, the long view, the big picture. You can't treat each day as though it may be your last day to get any kind of change. Oh my God, if he doesn't get his homework done today, as I said, the sun will not come up and I will not see tomorrow. Yes, you will. You have to be available. You have to be there. And you have to be willing to say, I'm not going to get what I want today. It's important. Look down the road. Come on. We all have that thing. When we're 17 or 18 and we get our first job, part-time maybe, and you say, I'm going to save up for a car. And you're looking at that car and you're saying, boy, that Mercedes looks really, really nice. Ain't gonna happen. The clunker that you buy is what you get. And you got to be okay with that. And the same thing here. You've got to be okay that the change isn't going to happen all together today. If you get 2% change, sometimes that's all you can do. If you get no change, but it doesn't get worse, that's all you can do. You cannot, I can't say enough of this. You can't allow family issues to dictate how you deal with your child. I don't care what's going on between you and your wife, or you and your mother, or you and the rest of the family, or you and the teachers, or you and the neighbor, or you and the government. Doesn't matter. If you let that dictate how you deal with your child, my God, you have no chance. And they never forget. Kids remember. They remember everything. I smacked my son once because he scared the hell out of me. I forget what he was doing. I think he was playing on something or other. It was headed out to the road, and I grabbed him. He's what? And I smacked him. I was scared to death. That happened when he was 7. One time in 34 years. He remembers it to this day. They don't forget. So if you say, "Ah, it won't matter in a couple of years, he'll be okay." No, it won't. No, it won't. So if you let family issues determine how you're going to deal with your child, you're all going to be unhappy, and the kids will not forget. You decide it's somebody else's problem. If you got children, it's nobody else's. It's your, I don't care who's got custody. I don't care how often you see them. I don't care what the circumstances are. I don't care if you're, on home release, and you got an ankle bracelet on. I don't care. You can't let it be somebody else's problem. And you got to work. If you're a teacher, you got to work with the parents. If you're a parent, you got to work with the teachers. You got to work with the team. You have to deal with this. It doesn't go away. Failing to get help. It'll pass. I was like that when I was a kid. Yeah, no, it won't pass. And if you're having problems, you got to stick your hand up and say, I can't handle this by myself. It's like 12 steps, AA. You have to decide that you can't handle it alone. Support groups, there's agencies, the school, your family, other people. I've had families where they don't tell everybody in the family they got an ADHD child. They diagnosed everything, they're having terrible problems in school and everything else. But when they talk to the rest of the family, oh, he's fine. And so everybody thinks he's fine. And then when the kid winds up in the hospital because he was rollerblading out the street or whatever in the middle of, 6 lanes of traffic, why did that happen? Get help. There's always help. There's always at least a school. And there's always, even in the community, there's resources. But talk to someone. And sometimes between parents, they don't talk. You have families where, they pretend everything's just fine. And that's a bad thing. So you've got to get help. Now, going back to our case study here. What do you think? Okay, here's little Johnny. Same thing. Does not improve with time. This is the kicker. Does not improve with time. What does that tell you? It tells you that there's a structural problem. It tells you that this is not transient. It's not going to go away. It's not going to get better next week. It's not going to suddenly, the sun rises and here he is. He's fine. No, he's not fine. He doesn't improve with time. So you have to have intervention. Something has to get done. Needs an evaluation, maybe medication. At least he's going to need to be worked up. Somebody's going to have to look at him and say, this is what I'm seeing. And it has to be involved with multi-environments. The school has to be involved. The home has to be involved. Maybe the community. But he has to get help. This is a boy who's in trouble. Didn't start out that way, looked pretty good. I was looking at this case, just blind. I would say probably maybe ADHD, could have some more problems. And here's the kicker. A lot of these problems, if they're not addressed, they get worse. The kids who are problematic early on, behavior problems, get to be conduct disorder when they're 10. By the time they're 18, the diagnosis goes into sociopathy, sociopaths, people who don't care about other people, and worse, drug abuse, serious problems with the law, etc. So, with little Johnny here, you got to do something, and this is key. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Sure.
I can't remember what slide it was. You were talking about the autism spectrum disorder, and
Yeah.
you mentioned communication.
Yeah.
Does nonverbal communication count?
Yes, it does. There are children who are nonverbal.
That question for us, please, because it's hard for us to hear that.
Okay.
What the question was.
The question was, in terms of autistic spectrum disorder, when I was talking about communication, does nonverbal communication count? Yes, it does. There are kids who sign. There are kids who they don't talk, but they understand. Their receptive language function is better than their expressive, and they have communication in terms of nonverbal communication. That counts as communication. When I say communication, I mean verbal, nonverbal, because that is a factor. Other questions? God, it's so good. What I wanted to get across to everybody here is that this is just a general view. If there's interest, I can be more specific and relate it to a different age groups, because dealing with school-age children is different from dealing with adolescents. Oh, very different. And dealing with preschool children is different than both of those. Also dealing, I didn't mention a lot about kids with structural problems, seizure disorders, kids who are PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, kids who have post-infection, encephalitis, or meningitis. These kids have specific problems that may be more directly related to their neurologic difficulty disorders. And this is what we try and look at, because it may be specific to a particular thing. We have kids with seizure disorders that mimic ADHD, and they also have learning issues that are specifically related to the seizure disorder. The better the seizure disorder is treated, the better they do. And that's a factor. So if they aren't getting optimal treatment, if they're on the wrong anticonvulsant, or if they don't respond well to anticonvulsants, or if they're not getting good follow-up, these are all issues. Kids who are under psychiatric care, again, how often are they reviewed? How often is the prescription updated? How relevant is the prescription? Are there side effects that are keeping the children from being happy with their medication, or at least tolerating it? Are there issues that are related to giving it that are specific to the family that need to be addressed? These are all things that we're concerned with, that we like to work with as good as possible. The whole point is to get a good outcome. And we could do that if everybody works on the same page and everybody is dedicated to the same thing. We all want to make sure that the child does well. That's the whole point of it. Yeah.
Very briefly on disruptive mood dysregulative disorder.
Yeah, DMDD.
DMDD.
Yeah.
I know probably in the next 15 minutes you won't have time to delve into that for us, but is there some place that I can read more about that or learn more?
Well, you can go online and there's descriptions about it. Basically, these are children, they have problems in regulation. They don't settle well. They're irritable all the time. Your kids, they wake up and they're fussy and they're squabbling all the time. They're moody. They have difficulty in handling stress of even the limited nature. And so life is full of stressors. Their sister takes their favorite toy, or, instead of pancakes in the morning, dad's giving them cereal. These are the things that set them off, and suddenly there's a temper tantrum and they bounce off the walls. And that happens all the time. It's not something that comes and goes. It's something that is constant. It
Like
has
a
to be there
daily
for.
battle, like
Pardon?
it's a daily battle.
It's pretty much a daily battle. But even if you're not tantruming, they don't settle. They're unhappy. It's like they sit at a table and they're miserable, and they do nudgy things. It's like they make life miserable for everybody around them. And the tantrums are constant. It's like 3 or 4 times a week by definition. Again, the DMDDs, it's not something that's that common. ADHDs with DMDD type symptoms are more common. Kids with oppositional defiant disorder, the tantrum are more common. DMDD
is like a comorbidity of something else.
Well, it's an outgrowth more. It's dysregulation. Kids who are people who are bipolar or dysregulated, these kids can't settle themselves. They can't. Normally, a kid, you stress them a little bit. Somebody comes into the classroom and you say, oh, by the way, we're having a quiz today. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about that, but it's on everything you've covered for the past 10 years. You know, that's stress. Most kids go, oh, geez. They take a couple deep breaths, they settle. These kids can't do that. And it doesn't take a lot of stress to do it. It takes minimal stress to push them over the edge.
And at what age do you start seeing?
These are kids that typically, BMDDs, we don't really diagnose until they get to be about at least 8 years old, 9 years old. And it has to have been going on for at least a couple of years. It's not something that comes and goes. It's not something that hasn't been there for a long time.
So just speaking on this, when a child be misdiagnosed with ADHD, if they're evaluated at age 6 and truly have DMD, because my son was evaluated at 6. And I missed the first half hour. That's the whole thing. I pick your brain when it's over. So I'm glad that you brought that up because he was diagnosed with the Neuropsych Institute in New Hampshire, which used to be in Manchester, that are now in Hempstead. And he was labeled with dyspraxia, ADHD combined, and PTSD with other stress-related disorder. And then COVID hit, so he completely missed out on the autism testing until the mask issue was resolved. So now I have to jump back into that. And I'm getting help with the School for Educational Recognition of Autism currently, now that I know that I can, because it's older brother. But everything you're saying right now, it's my son. Like, he could literally say, what can I have to eat? And I can say, the snack peppers or an apple. And then he'll literally blow up at me. And like, it's all day long. The littlest thing can set him off. It's like a war in my house every day, all day.
What you have to understand is the nature of psychiatric disorders is they're messy. There is no, all the psychiatric disorders, there's no lab test, or MRI, or CT that is going to give you the diagnosis. The diagnosis comes on the basis of observations and history. And some tests like neuropsych tests or psych tests. But a lot of it comes down to a judgment call. And by definition, a lot of these disorders that we're talking about, they look different at different ages. And so it's difficult early on to make a diagnosis like BMDD. First of all, you can't make it early on because it's a diagnosis that basically comes after you reach a certain point of development. Now, the problem is that DMDD overlaps with ODD, opposition defiant disorder, CD, conduct disorder, and aspects of ADHD. So it's not that clear cut. And that's why you get multiple diagnoses like PTSD, ADHD, etc. I mean, they're all the same kid, and they're all describing various aspects of the behaviors. But the problem is that it's not that clear cut. When I talked about, those two different aspects of ADHD, the two subtypes, major subtypes, there are a bunch of subtypes, and there's overlap, and it's messy. So it's not that easy. Back when I was training back in the day, what I was taught was, first of all, you don't treat on the basis of just the diagnosis. You're not treating a diagnosis, you're treating the child. So you have to look at all aspects. And if you miss something, it may be critical. For example, you have kids who were diagnosed but never had an EKG or an EEG or a workup by a neurologist. And later on, they're found to have seizure disorders. You treat the seizure disorder, suddenly it improves the behaviors a lot. So that's why we always try to get a comprehensive evaluation, like they're doing, the institute. The idea is you want it all the bases covered.
So with, like you said, how like the DMDs DMDs at a later age.
Yep.
And he had a preemptive exam when things really started to go awry with him out of nowhere. Would that make it worth asking them to redo the whole process to reevaluate their previous diagnosis?
No, because what you're doing is, if you start hunting for diagnoses, you're gonna wind up, forgetting about why you're there. What you're there is to treat the child. And when you're treating a child with behavior disorders, you're treating the behavior problems. So it doesn't matter what you call it. The situation isn't any different. If I say your child is DMDD today, and yesterday I said he was ADHD, has he changed? No, he's still the same child. He still has the same problems. He still has the same issues, and the treatment is the same. So you're not treating on the basis of the diagnosis. You're treating on the basis of the behaviors and the response to intervention. In other words, okay, we've tried, different kinds of behavioral interventions and nothing works. Okay, so you go to medication. You try a particular medication. You might try, to start with something like for an ADHD Ritalin. But you might try, if that doesn't work, you might try Statera. You might go to one of the SSRI. You might go to, and this is what the basis of trying to treat kids with severe behavior problems comes down to. It's not easy, and a lot of it is trying to what works, because again, you're working with a developing brain, and we really don't understand what went wrong and why it specifically went wrong the way it did. So the difficulty comes if you're trying to treat a diagnosis and you say, well, yeah, it's definitely ADHD. Well, what's he responding to? That's what your key is. What are they responding to? For instance, when we give Ritalin to a child, almost everything, if you get antibiotics, if you get supplements, if you get anything else, what do? We work it out on a milligrams per kilogram basis. When it comes to ADHDs, we give Ritalin at a specific basis. Why? Because kids metabolize it differently. I've had little bitty kids, 20 kgs, and they're getting 35 milligrams. And you got this big hulking adolescent, who's basically over 100 kgs, 6'3", plays middle linebacker, and he's on 15 and doing fine, both of them. So you're not treating on the basis of the disorder. You're treating on the basis of what the child responds to and how they respond to it. And this is how you work. Typically, we like to try non-medication intervention first to see what we can do with it. But there are kids who clearly aren't going to be touched by that. I mean, you get kids come in and are bouncing off the walls when they get in, and 6 weeks later, they're still bouncing off the walls. You have no window. You can't work with them. They don't sit. They don't respond. Their agenda is to get out the door as fast as they can. What are you going to do? You're going to sit there and try and do therapy with them? No, you have to get them stabilized first. The MDDs are hard because they're dysregulated. So it means stabilizing them is really, really hard. The medications you use, may be different than other medication. You might have to go to an antipsychotic type of medication. The old days used to use haloperidol because it worked. You stabilize them and you try to titrate down or shift to another medication. I'm not a big fan of polypharmacy, but that's my particular bias. There are a lot of psychiatrists who use polypharmacy and they're good at it. To me, I was trained in neurology. With neurologists, what you do is you give one medication. If that doesn't work, you titrate it down, pull it out, put another one in. So.
Might be another topic for maybe a part 2 of maybe a series to come. But I'm wondering if you might be able to just briefly talk about the importance of discipline and consequences, but also the teaching of strategies, of coping skills.
Yes.
You could.
Yeah. The idea is, when I talked about the authoritative method of parenting. This is what you're talking about, basically, because what it consists of is setting limits and having consequences, but communicating with the child on the basis of, here's what we're trying to do, here's why we're trying to do it, and here's what it means when I say to you, if this isn't done, this is going to happen. Now, if something, happens untoward that you weren't expecting, that kept you from doing this, I'll listen. But the rules are still the rules, and the behaviors are still the behaviors that we're working with. That is authoritative. That means you set consequences and you stay with it. But you talk to your children, you negotiate, and you explain. It's not out of the blue. It's like with my son, running out in the street, I smacked him. I sat him down after that and I said, "Hey, look, it's a busy street. I know you're careful. I know you look both ways most of the time, but maybe one time you don't." So the idea is, at this point, you don't go out across the street without one of us around. And that's the deal. You do it, you're going to spend the next week in your house. And that's why, because it scares the hell out of him. Now, what resonated with him was that I was scared. Dad isn't scared of anything. Dad, is Superman. No, I wasn't wearing the S on my chest. So, he got the point because I was scared. But it was because I talked to him and I explained why, if he went across the street without one of us, he was grounded for a week. That's the difference. You explain. You set limits, but you talk to them. You explain. And sometimes things happen. Sometimes the kid's a mess that day, and it's not the time to go to the wall. And in that day, you say, "Come on, let's just call it a day. Come on, I'll read to you. We'll go to bed." You don't push it to the limit. That's the authoritarian style. It's the rule and you gotta do it. See, there's a way to get it done. But what you're talking about is important, because if there are no limits, is there nothing that this kids, they'll just go as far as they can until they hit the wall. And what does that mean? It means there's no limit. It means you got kids at 12 years old who are out at 3 o'clock in the morning. It means you got kids who are sitting down there playing with matches and, deciding to what burns best. You can't let that happen. So you've got to set limits. But you also got to talk to your kids and you have to sit down and go over what's happening and why. Even the kids, because you got to remember, these kids love you. I mean, I don't care what you do to them. I mean, I've been to court, working with abusive families and everything else where Dad used to come home half in the bag and decide that the biggest thing to do was to throw his kid across the door. Regularly. Kids still love him. They love you. Use it. You want the best for them. You're a parent. So this is what you do. But if you don't set limits, you're really doing the deal on your kid and yourself and the school and the teachers and everybody who has to work with this child. And what happens down the road is that kids without limits become kids who don't appreciate limits in anything else. Then you got to really sort this over. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. You said earlier that ODD was diagnosed as early as age 6.
Yeah. And
then you said something.
DMDD was diagnosed. Usually, it's DMDD is after 8, and CD
So
conduct disorder is usually diagnosed after 10.
So what happens at 18 ODD? I thought you said something happens in adulthood
Oh,
there.
what happens with all of these disorders is that when they get to be adults, it's a progression. If nothing is done, if they don't get the help that they need, what happens is that they continue to struggle. They struggle as adults the same way they struggled as adolescents and the same way they struggled as school-age children, only it gets ramped up so that the kid who, was oppositional at, 10, decides it's a good idea to take a swing at a police officer when he's 20. And then things happen. And so this is, the problem is, it's like anything else. None of us stays the same. We grow, we change. I got news. I'm a lot different now than I was 10 years ago. And not for the better. So the idea is we're all changing. We're all moving on. But the difficulty is that the problems that haunt a child in school age and in adolescence turn into things that continue to haunt them and to make life difficult later on. And they pay the price, and you'll pay the price. Except that it gets more costly.
Dr. Nestor, we have either a parent or a teacher watching over Zoom that has a question.
Sure.
It's Ms. Kern. Ms. Kern, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, so earlier, Dr. Nesser, you had mentioned about, I wrote it down, but I am myself an adult with ADHD and my son is as well, about how we want them to behave, what's normal, what's not. So is it so important to conform exactly to how we should be expecting our children to behave? I mean, basic guidelines, yes, but if they happen to be out of the box thinkers, it's okay to adapt around how they think. Basically, they're like, use the way that their brains work to their advantage. Also, my son does suffer from some PTSD. We've had some traumatic events in our lives. So.
Oh, it's not only okay, it's necessary that you adapt to the learning styles and the behavior of the child. It's like, this is what I'm talking about, planning. You have to have a plan. You have to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses, what can you do, what does he do well, what does he do not so well, and then structure your interventions around those aspects of it. If you have expectations that he can't meet, you're really creating problems for yourself and the child. If you, on the other hand, if you set no expectations, you're really creating problems for yourself and the child. But different children have different learning styles. We're both different. We're all different. And so how they learn is the basis of how you plan. And the school can help with that. It's the idea of, if they're a visual learner, okay, there's things that you can adapt in the classroom to make the things that cannot be learned visually more adaptable. If he's an auditory learner, then, instead of presenting graphs, et cetera, you may work out a way to talk them through and provide a self-dialogue to have them learn how to talk their way through things that cannot normally be managed without having a visual component. So there's ways to do that. And it's very necessary to do that. So yeah, the answer is sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better. Thank you, because that's, kind of what I've been gearing towards, is just, expounding on what he feels most comfortable with and what seems to work for him, and trying to figure out ways to enhance his learning that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all messy. We don't do the things that we're necessarily expected to do. A good example is I was totally convinced that this talk was tomorrow night. And believe me, I have it in my calendar. I have it written in 6 different places to make sure I got here on time. Lo and behold. So, bottom line is, we're messy people. We're going to screw up. We're going to do it wrong. We're going to do less well at times than other times. And at the end of the day, all we can do is the best we can. And the other thing to remember is kids are durable. And I would say this to
Mm.
everyone. Kids are durable. They're not fragile little things. They can weather the storm if they get reasonable amounts of support. And
Mm.
so this is the thing we have to hold on to. I've seen kids, come through very difficult situations and come out the other end pretty good. And
That's
so
awesome.
I think that's what we have to hang on to.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Nestor, again, thank you so much for really as parents, community members, administrators, teachers that are here this evening. These are the kids that we teach in our classrooms, the ones that we're talking about tonight. They're the kids that we love, that we care for. And while, yes, there are some challenging behaviors, these are some of the kiddos that we adore the most in the public schools. We do have to keep this conversation going. Gosh, we could be here for hours this evening, but I'm really hopeful that you might be that tonight was valuable to you, that you might be interested in coming back to learn a little bit more about how we are supporting children with challenging behaviors in the schools. We've done a lot of work over the last 3-4 years in the Milford School District. We'd like to talk with you about our MTSSB model, which is multi-tiered systems of support for all kids in Tier 1, and then tiered levels of support that increase for students that might have more challenging behaviors. We'd like to talk to you about some of the work that we've done with trauma-based approaches, how we interact with students, how we are teaching children some calming regulation type skills, and asking them to practice those skills while they're here in school. When we're meeting with parents, we're asking parents to help provide opportunities for practicing some of those strategies and those coping skills at home. We've seen some great success. Some of the other skills that we are working with students on is solution-based practices, really thinking about not necessarily the behavior in the moment, but about the solution and being able to implement those practices that are going to be effective over and over again when students are in environments with challenges that they are contending with. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. Yes, I geek out on this topic. I'm really excited about this work. Very, very grateful that Dr. Nestor moved here to Milford just this past fall, reached out and said, hey, how can we help? So let's lock arms and continue this conversation. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and enjoy your ride home. Be safe.
Thank you.